to our Wednesday reflection. I'm very excited and very pleased to have a wonderful guest, one with whom I'm very familiar and one who is a colleague of our president. I want to introduce to you Dr. Reginald Blount. Reverend Dr. Blount is what I would consider to be a pastor, professor, and theologian of the public square. He's a longtime pastor with the AME denominations, currently serving the Arnett Chapel congregation. He's professor of formation, leadership, and culture at the Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary and executive director of the Oikos Institute that he will speak about later. I know him both as a professor and as my advisor for my doctoral program. And we also know him as a friend to CTS, as he is a part of the Black Faith Leader Collective. He is also a loving father, husband, and all around kind person. His education background is distinguished as he received a BS in chemical engineering from Tuskegee University. He received his MDiv from Candler School of Theology at Emory University, and he received his PhD at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in a joint program with Northwestern University. And so I introduce to you today Reverend Dr. Reginald Blount.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you to all of you for being a part of and allowing me this opportunity to be a part of your Wednesday reflections. Thank you to Dr. Stephen Ray, my dear friend, for this opportunity in the CTS community. Our conversation today is around how faith communities can make a great social impact. And having some conversation with Brian in preparation for this, he wanted me to share some of my some of my life journey and what has led me to this focus around social impact. And then as we are in conversation today, to lean in more around what are some things that faith communities can do to make a greater social impact where they serve. And this provided me a great opportunity to begin thinking about my vocational journey and where did this whole interest around social impact emerge. And what came to mind, what came to me as I reflected on this after all of these years of the work that I've done, is realizing that this whole thing around social impact has really been a calling. One definition of social impact is how the actions of organizations, businesses, individuals affect the well-being of other individuals and community. And I began to see that throughout my life, I have been this agent of social impact in a variety of situations, circumstances, places, and opportunities. And one of the first things that came to mind was my time at Tuskegee Institute, which is now Tuskegee University. I was blessed to end up serving as the student government president at Tuskegee. And I recognized in those times when I was at Tuskegee that I was fighting for the well-being of students. And I was also reminded that was also the time when Jesse Jackson was first running for president. And when Jesse announced that his run for the presidency, he announced in Atlanta. And then the next place that he came to the next day was Alabama. And he came and he spoke at Tuskegee during that time. And I was serving as SGA president at the time. And out of that relationship, I became the Alabama student coordinator for Jesse Jackson's first run for president. And so as I think about that and that work, I was really living into. I hadn't thought about ministry yet. Hadn't had no thoughts about going into becoming a pastor or anything along those lines. But I was living out this call to be an agent of social impact. I'm part of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, as you've heard, but I didn't grow up in the AME Church. My church background has been quite ecumenical, and we can probably talk about that at another time. But I found myself joining the African Methodist Episcopal Church because one, it was a great congregation, St. Philip AME Church in Atlanta, Georgia, that I became connected to. But then when I began to understand its history, this was a denomination that was birthed primarily out of engaging in social impact in Philadelphia, emerging out of the Free African Society, where it was caring for, committed to enhancing the well-being of free Africans in Philadelphia. They were the ones who, when there was a pandemic in 1793, the yellow fever, this was the community that was helping others, either caring for the sick that contracted the yellow fever, helping to bury those who sadly died from it. This was the community that was engaged in not just caring for the well-being of free Africans in Philadelphia, but for the larger community. And so this was, again, a denomination basically birthed out of a commitment to caring for the well-being of others. You know, I got my undergraduate in chemical engineering, which I always find quite fascinating now that I find myself in ministry and find myself as a scholar, a practical theologian. But I recognize that now, particularly more than ever, that even my chemical engineering degree was not in vain. Part of the work of engineers is to take raw materials and make them useful, I would say, for the well-being of others. And so even though I'm not I don't practice as being a chemical engineer, much of the things that I've learned in being an engineer finds its way into my practical theology work. And so oftentimes I kid and say that I'm a theological engineer now. And so that, you know, I also like to say God has jokes. Y'all may already know that. God has jokes, because this whole pastor part of my life, even seeking a PhD, was not on my radar when I was going through undergrad, or really any time. And so when I got called, when I answered the call, it took me by surprise. But it really has allowed me to really lean into what I'm now fully or recognizing more and more, this broader call of being an agent for social impact. As a pastor, I've been a pastor now for some 23 years. And in that role, I have, in the 4 churches that I have pastored, all of them have been community focused. And in those congregations that I've served, I've worked on issues around food insecurity, helping to start a free farmers market in the Waukegan area during the summer, where the community that was experienced that we were serving in was part of a food desert, and we were able to bring fresh fruits and vegetables and other items to this community to help address the food insecurity issues that was taking place there. We started Zumba classes because we began to understand that 50% of chronic diseases can be alleviated by exercise and nutrition. And so we wanted to make sure that the community had opportunities to be engaged in those areas that can help for better health. We have been working now at my work at Arnett in bringing Children's Defense Fund Freedom School to the area to help address issues around child poverty and education. And what I realize also is that along with this call to be an agent for social impact, in this role also of pastor, I also realized that I pastor in two locations. I pastor in a congregation, but I also pastor in the academy. And that's how I understand my role at Garrett and in teaching. And in the work that I do as teaching in the area of Christian education. My definition of Christian education, or what the purpose of Christian education is to set people free, free to be children of God and free to be co-creators with God. And so in living out that understanding and that definition of Christian education, I realize now that's also living out the sense of being an agent for social impact. How can we understand the teaching and the work that we do in Christian education as a way of setting people free, to release them, to be able to be children of God and co-creators with God. And part of that co-creation is caring for the well-being of individuals and communities. And this has then evolved in work that I've been doing at Garrett as in teaching related to youth and young adult ministry. This has translated into a grant that I direct for Garrett around how do we do ministry with young adults. And we have learned what we've already known, but we have learned that this generation of young adults are strongly lean into a desire to make a difference, to do something greater than, be a part of something greater than themselves, to lean into a desire to really make impact, lasting impact in the places and areas that they serve. And I've also had the opportunity to direct a grant that our Fourth Episcopal District of the AME Church has received in helping pastors become more outwardly focused, community engaged, and not just inwardly focused. And it's through that work that I began to realize the importance of providing to our congregations a supportive ecosystem that can really help them do the kind of social impact work that they desire to do. With the congregations that I've been working with, and as I look over the landscape, particularly those congregations working in under-resourced communities, these congregations are doing the work, trying to make a difference, trying to have the impact, but they don't always have access to collaborative partners, to be able to have access to the kinds of resources that they need, that where they could fully do the kind of work that they want to do. Part of the other challenge is our congregations are not viewed as anchor institutions like schools and hospitals and others are seen as. Yet they are clearly anchor institutions in helping in doing the best that they can to speak to the well-being and wellness of the community that they serve. And so I'm committed to finding ways of equity and support for these faith-based anchor institutions, these congregations, to be able to have collaborative partners, access to resources, financial and otherwise, to truly be able to maximize their potential and do the work that they're called to do, which is the reason why I and Dr. Sidney Williams co-founded the Oikos Institute for Social Impact, because we want to assist congregations in in their ability to harness the power of all of their assets. And when we talk about assets, it's based off of a model that Dr. Sidney Williams have come up with called FISH, or Fishing Differently. And FISH stands for financial or faith capital, intellectual capital, social capital, and human capital. How can congregations understand that they have all of these assets already at their disposal, but needing to find ways to really harness the power of these assets? And also thinking about one of the primary assets that they have, and that is their church building. How do they begin to reimagine how that they can use this primary asset that they have to really assist them in doing the social impact work they desire to do in the communities that they serve? And so I'm grateful, Brian, I'm grateful to CTS for this opportunity to say more around how faith communities can make a greater social impact, because again, it has allowed me to really think through and really claim that I've been called to be an agent for social impact. And this is how it's been living out in my journey.
Thank you, Dr. Blount. And I want to point out throughout your presentation, we kept hearing one term, social impact. And I would assume it's, for you, it's synonymous with practical theology. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about social impact and practical theology, my first question to you is, how do you bear witness to God with these assignments that you have? I've watched your career for a short period, and I've seen an evolution even in the time that I have observed your work. And so I'm sure people come to you all the time and they say, well, why are you doing all this? I mean, why don't you just remain in the academy? You know, there's this notion that you should just stay put and do work in one space, but you have expanded. So first I want to ask you, how do you bear witness to God in each of these assignments?
A great question. And I guess I want to answer that. I pray that I am bearing witness to God faithfully. And that is, I believe that in all of the things that I feel called to and drawn to, it is spirit-led. These are the things that God has called me to do. I probably also want to say too that you know, our Western notions tend to lead us toward things needing to be siloed. You know, you only do stuff that's in the academy, or only do stuff that's in the church, or you only do stuff that's in corporate America. It's the reason why I insist on declaring that my identity is pastor. And now I'm taking on this identity of agent of social impact as well. But my identity is pastor. So even in the academy, I tell them I am a pastor, but I pastor in 2 locations. I pastor in a congregational setting, but I also pastor in the academy. I approach my teaching, I approach my academic work, I approach my scholarship from the standpoint of being a pastor, of caring about the well-being of others. And I believe that I apply that and live that calling out in all that has been entrusted to my care.
And a question has just been posed: how can a church do everything, and is mission creep inevitable? And of course, you know, we call it mission drift. This is a big topic that we've discussed.
Well, yeah. And yeah, let me just be honest. Mission creep is inevitable if we lose sight of our why. And Brian knows that, you know, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and his notion around start with why. But the whole premise is around we get caught up in the what that we do. And oftentimes we give some focus to how we do what we do. but we don't pause enough to remind ourselves, why do we do the things that we do? So that the why allows us to know what to say yes to and what to say no to. Another way of talking about that is, I believe just as individuals have a call, organizations, institutions, particularly those who claim, who embrace their understanding, their identity as being a faith-based organization, we too have, that organization has a calling as well. And we need to, and oftentimes we can become distracted by a lot of great opportunities. We can become distracted by various challenges that come our way. And every now and then we need to sit with ourselves. The committee, the organization needs to sit with itself and ask, let us reclaim, why did God call us into existence? Why are we here? And let's reclaim that vocational identity so that it can then help guide us in how we then engage in whatever work or impact we're called to do.
And having said that, and you may have answered this, but I'm going to rephrase it. Why did you insist on pastoring a congregation, given your assignments in the academy and now expanding outward?
Because I'm called to serve God's people. And please hear me. It caught me by surprise. I did not. I don't have any pastors in my family lineage. I didn't carry on the family business. But I felt this call. And well, let me be even further transparent. Even when I answered the call to ministry, I answered the call in a Bible study. So I really began with this whole work around Christian education and teaching. And so I was getting comfortable with, okay, God, you're calling me to teach. You're calling me to, engage in this work of Christian education. And then, as I guess the Lord said, I needed to take you slowly. Mm-hmm. And then I began to get this urge, this yearning to pastor God's people. But when I think about it, when I really think about it, I've always worked around, again, caring for the well-being of others. Becoming a pastor was a natural progression for me. Yeah.
So I see a hand raised. Brother Larry Crockett has a comment or a question. Could you unmute yourself?
Yes, I think I'm unmuted.
Okay.
When I was a student at CTS centuries ago, there was a fairly large chasm between Christians who believe that one should have a personal relationship with Christ to be saved, be born again, accept Christ as your Savior, and so forth. And Christians who are very concerned with the social gospel, as we called it then, social action. I had a friend who I'd gone through college with who came to CTS and left after 1 year because he felt CTS didn't take that relationship with Christ seriously enough. So I wonder, Dr. Blount, do you feel that chasm still exists in some way today? And how do you personally navigate that tension between the personal relationship with Christ and the impact in the public square?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. How do I want to answer this? I think that there are in some corners still this chasm. I don't know what the right words are right now, but I think that it's a competing notion that should not be a competing notion. When I think about the Great Commission, it says, go, baptize, and make disciples and teach them what I have taught you. And if we spend time in the Gospels, we would recognize that Jesus did most, if not all, of his work in the public square. And so the relationship was around becoming an imitator of the teacher, becoming an imitator of the one for whom you call rabbi. And so we can have a personal relationship with God, with Jesus, but that personal relationship then needs to be exercised or acted upon based on what Jesus said for disciples then to go and do. And so I don't think you can divorce the two. I think it's a false dichotomy. It's a false setup. That if to have a personal relationship with Jesus is to truly be a faithful disciple of Jesus. And the only way that we can be a faithful disciple of Jesus is to follow, is to emulate what Jesus did.
Well, thank you. I think I would answer the question in much the same way that you have. Thank you very much.
And this is a great segue to another portion of your work, Dr. Blount. As we talk about imitating Jesus and being disciples of Jesus, I'm mindful of Jesus telling the disciples to honor children, to suffer the children to come unto him. And I know that you have a powerful affinity for youth. Obviously, teaching youth culture and in the academy, preparing students for youth ministry, and then having led the establishment of 2 Children's Defense Fund freedom schools. So, in your journey, could you talk to us about what led you on that particular part of your journey?
So here's again where I believe God has jokes. When I was in seminary at Candler School of Theology, it was awarded a Lilly grant to begin a program called the Youth Theology Institute, and the whole purpose of the Youth Theology Institute was to help to engage high school youth in a way that had them fall in love with theology. It was based off of an East Coast concept called governor school. And in governor schools, it would be where high school students would go to various college campuses and get immersed in particular subjects, whether it be science or music, or STEM or something along those lines. And the thought was, well, what would it mean to have a program that that allowed high school students to be immersed in theology? And when I was in seminary, this program just got started, and I needed a summer job. And so I applied to be an assistant to this Youth Theology Institute. Mind you, teenagers scared the heck out of me. You know, when I was growing up, I had more affinity with older folk than even with my own peers. And so working with teenagers, I mean, that made me very, very nervous because I didn't think I was going to be cool enough to work with them. What I learned through the Youth Theology Institute is that teenagers are not looking for more peers. They're looking for faithful adults willing to walk alongside them, to help them become all of who God has called them to be. And it's out of that program that changed the whole trajectory of my career, which moved me in my work with Christian education, but primarily focused on youth. And I was in seminary in the early mid-90s. And so that was also when millennials were teenagers. And so I've been walking with millennials since their teenage years, which has led to my work with youth as well as young adults. And so I have a strong commitment in helping and being a part of ministry with youth and young adults, but also working with those who are also ministering and working with youth and young adults to think about alternative ways to minister to them. Part of what I tell my class is that we pastor adults and program youth. And we need to understand that youth and young adult need pastors, not just programs. I don't have anything against programs. The issue is, what's the purpose around the programs that we're offering? The other thing that I offer in that is that I believe that youth and young adults are dealing with what I call 7 spiritual yearnings. These are not unique terms, but I think that they have a theological underpinning. And that is, youth are yearning for identity, purpose, healing, nurture, mentoring, and courage. And we need to be thinking about, how do we provide a ministry that helps to speak to these particular yearnings of young people? Coupled with that is, I had the opportunity during seminary to be introduced to Marian Wright Edelman and the Children's Defense Fund, and the work that they were doing around, at that time, reestablishing freedom schools. And freedom schools emerged out of the Mississippi Freedom movement, where 1,000 college students went to Mississippi to help register folk to vote. But in that same vein, they brought a curriculum with them to work with the children. And interestingly enough, this curriculum was co-developed with SNCC, with the National Council of Churches. And they took this curriculum to Mississippi in a way of helping to empower young people, in a way of helping them to know who they are and what they've been called to do, and how they can make a difference in their world. And ever since that exposure, I've been wanting to be in a community where we could establish freedom schools, to be able to have that same impact on young people in the communities that we serve, to help them to fall in love with reading, and to help them know that they can make a difference in their world. My colleague, Virginia Lee, and I, in a conversation, realized that we have the same affinity for the Children's Defense Fund, and also wanting to see what we could do to establish a freedom school. And in conversation with then President Lionel Richie, they were excited about the possibility of us bringing a freedom school to Evanston, and Garrett being a sponsor of it. And that's what we were able to do. We established a freedom school in Evanston. We established it in the 5th Ward that you know a lot about, Brian, because this was the ward, the only ward in Evanston that does not have an elementary school. And it is also the ward that has the largest percentage of Black and brown folk. And so we wanted to bring a freedom school into that community, to be able, into that neighborhood, in that community, to be able to provide the tenets that a freedom school offers to those young people. My learnings from that allowed me to then also bring a freedom school to Morgan Park, with Arnett Chapel, the church where I pastor now, being the sponsor of that program as well. So I'm very, very committed to the work of the Children's Defense Fund, very, very committed to the concept of freedom schools. I'm hoping, particularly under the new leadership that they have at the Children's Defense Fund with Dr. Starsky Wilson, that we will be able to see freedom schools grow more and more and more, and have a greater impact around the country.
So we have a question about the Freedom School, and I'll let you talk about it. The question is really about operations and how it's structured. And it specifically says, is the Freedom School an after school thing, or is it on a certain day of the week, or all different? So could you talk about how the program is structured?
Yeah, real quickly, and I would encourage folk to Google Children's Defense Fund Freedom School to be able to get more in-depth information. The primary program is designed to be a 6-week summer program that again is focused on helping young people fall in love with reading, and to as well as youth empowerment, helping them to understand that they can make a difference in their world in a variety of ways. It's a program that tends to run from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock during the day. Like I said, a 6-week program with resources that are part of their library, where they are reading books about folk that look like them. And it's multicultural, but it's resources that are there and available to be able to help children be able to see themselves and see possibilities for themselves. Their Children's Defense Fund provides you with all of the training that you need to be able to run an effective freedom school in your community. Each organization has to raise its own funds to do it, which tends to be a challenge. I'll just share, with us desiring to serve about 50 people, it requires raising around $70,000 to be able to do it. But there are ways where, again, this is where we can talk about communities, churches who want to make a social impact in their community. Freedom School could be one of those ways where you can begin to then develop collaborative partnerships in your community that would help offset costs in being able to offer it and make a difference where you are.
So as we pivot back to this holistic concept of practical theology and having a social impact, I want to ask you about the Oikos Institute and how it is essential in your ministry practice now.
So as I shared, Dr. Sidney Williams and I co-founded the Oikos Institute for Social Impact. And again, our commitment is to help congregations harness the power of their assets to be able to surround them with a supportive ecosystem to really be able to live out their vocational identity and make the kind of social impact that they desire to make. Particularly, we're talking about our primary work is with faith communities who are serving in under-resourced communities, and we really are committed to this model that Dr. Williams has offered, just around this whole notion that oftentimes congregations in their sometimes primary focus just on sheer survival, begin whether they desire to or not, to move away from a mindset or understanding of abundance to one of scarcity. And when one functions out of a scarcity mindset, then we miss oftentimes those things that are really, really available to us. When we're so distracted, and please hear me, I understand the distraction because I've been there. It's a challenge being the CEO of a small corporation called a church, and I know the challenges that come with that. But when we lose sight of a theology of abundance, that God is making available to us those things that we need, then we get distracted and we think that our resources are only coming from one particular place or another. And if that particular source is either dried up or not plentiful enough, and for many of our churches, that sources is tithes and offerings. If we feel that that source is not being able to provide us with everything that we need, then we get in panic mode. Then we're caught in this scarcity understanding, and we miss the fact that we have so many other assets that are available to us, if we can only find ways to better cultivate them. And so we have intellectual capital. Do we know all of the resources that are available with the folks sitting in our pews, and the contacts that they have, and the extension of their gifts that can be brought to bear in us trying to do the work that we do? Social capital. Are we as a congregation working in a silo where we think that the only place that we can receive, or only place where we are able to access resources is within just our own community? So we silo ourselves off from everybody else, and not recognizing that there really may be a plethora of other resources available to us if we're willing to build the relationships necessary and be able to collaborate with those who are interested in doing similar kinds of work. It's amazing to me. There's a whole bunch of folk in the Chicago area trying to deal with issues around food insecurity, for example. What would it mean for folk to bring their resources together to really try to address? Even in some communities, you got 5, 6, 7, 10 different organizations trying to do the same thing. What does it mean if we are able to find ways to collaboratively come together and be able to address the issue that we all say we're called to address? And human capital. So it's not just those who are within our own congregation, but also recognizing that we have the people in our congregation, and we also have so many other folk outside of our institution that we can draw on. Everyone, let me put it this way. I know of congregations that feel like if you're not a member, then we can't call on your gifts to help us do the work that we're doing. And I'm of the opinion that everybody doesn't have to be a member of your congregation to serve.
So, Dr. Blount, how, and of course, we are discussing that with CTS, but I'd like to let you have an opportunity to speak to a question that Maria Coyne has posed. How do congregations go about working with the Oikos Institute?
Great question. And our current model right now is working through seminaries to help build cohorts, where we're able to then work with those cohorts and take them through a training program that begins to help them reclaim their vocational identity and begin to open up thoughts and ideas about how they are able to reimagine and see clearer or clearly all of the other available assets that are available to them to be able to do their work, and then guide them into, so how do we now put this into action? We are also providing introductory workshops for congregations, just to begin helping them think about how do they want to think about their assets differently. So we have an introductory workshop that we do with congregations, that where we can bring to congregations around what does it mean to fish differently, and we can make that link available for folk to be able to access that.
So my final question to you, Dr. Blount, before we close is, and rooted in what we've just experienced, we see the power and the effectiveness of HBCUs. You are a product of an HBCU. And so it's obvious that you are a leader, you are creative, you are talented, and you have an affinity, and you still maintain your relationship with your alma mater and HBCU. So I want to close with this question of why HBCUs are essential today.
That's also a great question. And I'm not trying to be irreverent when I talk, but this is again another situation where God has jokes. It was not my intention originally to go to Tuskegee. If I'm transparent, I went to a predominantly white high school. I was one of two African-American males who were on a college preparatory track. I fell in love with chemistry. I had a great chemistry teacher when I was in high school. And I originally wanted to be a doctor, but for some reason I couldn't wrap my mind around being in school for 8 years. And I found out, wow, engineering, I could make a pretty good, decent salary after 4 or 5 years of school. Let me do this engineering thing. And so I figured out, I learned what engineering was, learned what chemical engineering was. And my desire originally was to go to Georgia Tech. But my SAT scores, I didn't test well. And now I know all about the issues around bias and all of that relates to testing and all of that. But I didn't score enough to get into Georgia Tech. An engineer recruited me to be a part of, to have a summer job at a nuclear power plant that's in Aiken, South Carolina. But I needed to be a part of one of the schools that was associated with the summer intern program that the Aiken, South Carolina power plant was affiliated with. And Tuskegee was recommended to me. I never heard, I just got to be transparent. We didn't talk about predominantly historically Black colleges at my high school. And so I had not heard of Tuskegee. But then when I read and I was told that it was a predominantly Black school, I said, okay, I'll go because it'll help me get this summer job. And it was important for me to have this summer job. And then I'll transfer to Georgia Tech after I've had my year at Tuskegee. Because, again, I'm going to be transparent. I'm one of two Black males going through college preparatory. So I'm sure I'm going to go and I'm going to ace this school, get what I need to get, and then move on to Georgia Tech. And I got to Tuskegee and it blew my mind. I got to be in a context where there were African Americans, Black students, as smart, if not smarter, than me. I also got to be in a context where, again, as I reflect back, being 18 to 21, being 18 to 22 years old in these emerging adult development years, not having to worry about racism. That I can be in a context where I can be me and flourish being me in a critical period of my growth and development. And so I believe also much of who I am and the development of my call to be a pastor and agent of social impact is a direct result of the nurturing that Tuskegee Institute provided to me. Who knows, maybe I could have become Student Government Association president at Georgia Tech, but I doubt it. Who knows, I could have been very active with Jesse Jackson's first presidential campaign, but I doubt it. Who knows that I probably could have met Maya Angelou and Nikki Giovanni and Louis Farrakhan and all of the other folks that I had the opportunity of engaging. Lionel Richie. I met Lionel Richie 2 days after I arrived at Tuskegee. His nickname is Skeeter. I remember it. Who knows? But I doubt it. Tuskegee offered me an opportunity, 18 to 22 years old, to flourish.
Thank you.
And and I believe, and the statistics don't show it out. I believe I was a better master's student and PhD student because of the experience that I had at an HBCU.
Thank you, Dr. Blount, for that powerful testimony. We've been blessed. This was a great presentation. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kim Schultz, with closing announcements and comments.
Thank you, Dr. Blount, for that conversation and for being with us. I believe there's a couple folks who have announcements, and I will make mine real quick first before we finish out for today, and that is that tomorrow, if you want to join into Facebook Live, we are doing Ramadan Quick Talks, 10 minutes, intimate, casual, interreligious conversations on Facebook Live. I'm putting the link to the IRI Facebook page. And so if you want to join us for a brief conversation, please do so tomorrow. And who do we have up next? Is it Chad?
It's me. Thank you, Kim. And thank you for this wonderful conversation, Dr. Blount and Reverend Smith. It was just a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate your words in this dialogue. So important today. Just a reminder, folks, that tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. is our annual Castaneda lecture. We'll be featuring Dr. Melissa Wilcox. It will be a fascinating conversation, so please join us for that. Also, Amy Ashleman was not able to be with us this morning, but she just wanted to remind CTS folk that we do have, she's offering Friday drop-ins at 11 a.m. on Friday morning, a time to come together to support one another in prayer and to take care of one another in these times. So just a reminder that that is happening. And we'll gather again next week when we will be recognizing the awardees for both our Sanderson Award as well as the G. Campbell Morgan Preaching Award. So we hope to see you back next week, same time, same station. Grace and peace to everybody. Bye.